Can I say straight away that I'm not entirely comfortable with the title of our discussion today, Ireland, a country in crisis. My problem is one of definition. Let me explain. I think the term country is far too broad to be useful for our discussion today. For example, I consider country to be a term that would include geographic and topographical connotations, and also in the context of this island we live on. I consider, Antrim, Derry, and places in the northeast of our country to be part of this country. And yet, if we use this term, it complicates our debate, because I think we're talking essentially about the crisis that has afflicted this part of the island. So I would suggest that we need to look at this slightly differently. I think if we approach this discussion with some precision, we should actually be talking about the Irish state and the crisis. Because I believe that this state has directly failed the majority of the Irish people. And that the structures and institutions of this state, made up by the political class, the higher civil service in particular, in the central bank, in the regulatory office, the professional classes, the bankers, etc., these are the people who have failed this state. But on the other hand, I think we must be careful of the use of failure, the word failure. Unquestionably, this state that we live in has failed the majority of Irish people in the recent past, but not necessarily the ruling elite. Even during the boom, the gap between the haves and have-nots increased in this country. And this has continued even now, today, even in the aftermath of the collapse. And believe it or not, the wealth of the ruling class at this same time in our society has increased. Let me say that this state has not failed them. But it's always been thus. Since its inception over 90 years ago, this state has continually failed the majority of the Irish people. It has failed them economically, it has failed them politically, it has failed them culturally, and it has failed them morally. To understand why this has been the case, one is to examine the nature of the southern state that emerged after a bitter civil war. Terence Brown, in his book Ireland, A Social and Cultural History, asks how a revolution fought on behalf of exhilarating ideals, which had been crystallised in the heroic crucible of the Easter Rising, could have led to the establishment of an Irish state notable for a stultifying lack of social, cultural, and economic ambition. The answer, as far as I'm concerned, lies in the social composition of the new state and in the forces that seized political and economic control. The Irish Free State, as it was called, was almost immediately dominated by an alliance between the new emerging Catholic middle class and the Catholic Church. This possibility was so feared by the poet William Butler Yeats that he wrote with some foresight that Ireland would emerge as merely a little greasy huckstering nation groping for halfpence in a greasy till. As Yeats anticipated, those that seized the reins of power in the new state installed a value system that embraced class prejudice, prudence, respectability, censorship, and sexual continence, all delivered with a startling lack of imagination. One of the first pieces of legislation, believe it or not, enacted by the new government in 1923 was the Censorship of Films Act, which banned many of the most important movies of the 20th century from being viewed in this country, and only was revoked quite recently when it was turned into from a censorship policy to a classification policy. And this was followed by the Censorship of Publications Act, And in subsequent years, the work of every Irish author of significance was banned from sale in the bookshops of the new Irish state. It's hard to believe that the inheritors of a rebellion fought with such inspirational vision could so quickly end up as the custodians of the imagination. Over the last 90 years, the dominant forces in Irish society have sought to create a society geared to serve their particular interests, and by and large, according to their own lights, they have been successful. It should be said, however, that there are others who have never benefited from this cosy setup. For example, the hundreds of thousands who have been forced into emigration because of the constant and repetitive economic failures over those 90 years. And there's an apocryphal story, I think, which points out the dichotomy of this whole issue of emigration. And it refers to a supposed conversation that took place between Eamon de Valera and Peadar O'Donnell, the socialist and Republican. And Peadar O'Donnell criticised de Valera for the over 500,000 Irish citizens who'd been forced into emigration since the foundation of the state. And Dev replied to Peadar saying, "But sure, Peadar, if you were in charge, that 500,000 would leave anyway." And Peadar replied, "Ah yes, but it would be a different 500,000. The institutions and structures of the Irish state have been sown with the seeds of division and failure right from the beginning, and that if we are to seriously tackle the severe problems that threaten our future, we will have to look beyond those failed structures that were established 90 years ago. And how are we to approach this monumental task? Well, for a start, let's dare to dream. This year is 100 years after the 1913 lockout. And in 1913, the poor of Dublin dared to dream of a better future, a future where they would have decent housing and have decent rights in terms of employment. In 1916, the leaders then dared to dream of a republic that would cherish all the children of the nation equally. I think that we must draw our strength and our inspiration from these people who dared to dream in their time. I think we must dare to dream now of a new republic from sod to sky that will serve the interests of the majority of Irish people and deliver fairness, equality and fulfilment to the vast majority of the Irish people. Thank you.